The storm is rolled in without warning across the Wyoming plains, a wall of black sky and hammering rain that swallowed the horizon. By sundown, the wind was howling so fierce it rattled fence posts from the ground, sent shutters banging, and bent the tall grass until it lay flat as if bowing to some angry god. Riding through that storm was a cowboy named Luke Harwood, a man who had known more silence than conversation, more dust than comfort. He pulled his coat tight, the brim of his hat dripping steady streams down his cheeks. His horse fought the wind with every step, hooves sloshing into mud that clung like chains. The storm did not let up that night. It pressed hard against Luke Harwood with every step, like it wanted to strip the girl right out of his arms. The trail back to his cabin was nothing but a slurry of mud and black water, swollen creeks spilling over banks, the earth itself shifting beneath the weight of the sky. His horse followed behind, head low, nostrils flaring, its dark mane plastered with rain. The woman was quiet in his hold, her body limp but trembling. He could feel her shivers even through his soaked coat. She hadn't spoken a word since he found her in that broken shed, though her lips had parted once or twice as if she wanted to. Maybe her voice had been beaten down by fear. Maybe it was simply gone. Luke didn't press her. He'd known silence himself. Sometimes it was the only way a person survived. The cabin's lantern light glowed faintly at last, a speck of amber against the storm's black maw. Relief struck Luke, though he didn't show it. He pushed through the door, kicked it closed, and carried her inside. The fire had gone low during his absence. He lowered her onto the bed, one of only 2 pieces of furniture besides the rough table and chair, and set to building the flames back up. Sparks caught, flames licked higher, and warmth began to chase away the damp. The woman stirred, eyes fluttering. They were a pale, washed-out blue, wide with fear even in the fire's glow. Her hands clawed weakly at the coat around her, but Luke reached out and held them still. Not rough, but steady. "You're safe," he said simply. "Ain't no storm gonna take you in here." Her throat worked, but only a rasp came. She tried again, her face contorting with effort, and a broken whisper escaped. "Please, don't." The rest vanished in air. Luke leaned closer. "Don't what?" Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes. She shook her head, unable to form the words. Instead, she grabbed the fabric of his shirt with surprising strength, clutching it like a lifeline. He sat still, letting her hold on until her grip loosened, her body giving in to exhaustion. He stayed there a while, watching her breathe, the firelight painting her face. Her skin was marked, mud streaks, yes, but something else. Dark bruises around her wrists, the kind rope leaves behind. His jaw tightened. Whoever had left her in that ruin hadn't just abandoned her. They had bound her, hurt her, and they'd done it, knowing the storm would finish the work for them. Luke stood slowly, went to the table, and poured water from the jug into a tin cup. He returned, lifting her head carefully, letting the rim touch her lips. She drank in small sips, water dribbling down her chin, but color came faintly back to her cheeks. When she lay back, she whispered again, broken but clearer than before. "Don't leave." Luke gave a slow nod. "I won't." He dragged the chair close to the bed, sat down heavy, and leaned his elbows on his knees. "You're here now. Storm's out there. That's all that matters tonight." For the first time since he'd found her, her body eased just a little, as though she believed him. The rain battered the cabin walls. Thunder rolled far across the plains. But inside, with the fire snapping and the woman finally closing her eyes, Luke kept his watch. Sleep tugged at him, but he resisted. Too many questions filled his mind. Who she was, where she'd come from, and what kind of men had tied her up and left her for dead. Questions that could wait until morning. For now, all he could do was keep the fire burning and make sure she saw dawn. By morning, the storm had blown itself ragged, leaving the world soaked and heavy with silence. The kind of silence that feels fragile, as if the land itself is catching its breath. Luke rose stiffly from the chair, his neck aching from a night of half-sleep. The fire had burned low, but enough embers remained to stir it back. He set on a kettle, then turned toward the bed. She was awake, watching him. Her eyes held the wariness of someone who'd lived too long in fear, measuring him like one might measure the reach of a snake before stepping too close. He didn't speak right away. Men who'd been soldiers, men who'd spent years alone on the frontier, Luke among them, knew the value of silence. He moved slowly instead, lifting the kettle as steam began to curl, pouring hot water over dried leaves he kept for tea. Finally, he carried a cup to her side. "Careful," he murmured, helping her sit against the wall. She winced at the movement, her hands trembling as she took the tin. Her voice came out cracked, a whisper rough with disuse. "Why? Why did you help me?" Luke eased back, rubbing his palm against his thigh. He thought about lying, about brushing it off with something simple, but her eyes demanded more. "Because I've seen what happens when a soul's left to die alone," he said at last, "and I ain't ever been able to stomach it." Her gaze flicked to the fire, and for a moment her face softened. She drank slowly, the tea warming her from the inside. But her shoulders never stopped their faint tremor, and Luke noticed the rope burns around her wrists more clearly now, raw and angry in the firelight. "Who did it?" he asked, his tone low but steady as her grip on the cup tightened. He didn't answer, but tears slid down her cheeks, silent as the rain still dripping from the cabin eaves. She shook her head violently, as if the words themselves were too dangerous to speak aloud. Luke didn't push, he just nodded. "All right, you don't have to tell me yet. Not until you're ready." Something in his voice must have reached her, because her shoulders sagged and she leaned back against the wall. She closed her eyes, still clutching the coat he'd laid over her. For the first time since she'd entered his life, he saw the faintest trace of peace cross her face. Luke stepped outside into the grey dawn. The world smelled of wet earth, of pine and ash. His horse stamped its hooves, uneasy, and Luke knew why. A storm like last night's washed away more than tracks, but men always left some kind of trail. If she had been left tied and beaten in that ruin, then someone had meant for her not to see another sunrise. And that kind of man rarely quit until the job was done. Luke scanned the tree line. The rain had blurred the ground, but he saw it anyway. Faint impressions where more than one horse had stood. Fresh. He crouched, ran his calloused fingers through the mud, and swore softly under his breath. Whoever had done this wasn't far. He returned inside. She was asleep now, her face pale but calmer. He crouched near the fire, staring into its flames. Luke had never gone looking for trouble. Trouble had always found him, in wars, in towns where men drank too much and trusted too little, on trails that led nowhere. But this time it was different. This wasn't just another fight or another stranger's quarrel. This time, trouble had left a woman half dead in a storm, and somehow she had ended up in his care. And Luke Harwood wasn't the kind of man to walk away from that. The next night fell cold, though the storm had passed. The moon came out silver and clear, hanging over the timberline like a lantern meant for wanderers. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady, casting long shadows across the walls. She was stronger now, able to sit up without help. Luke had made broth from venison and wild onions, coaxing her to eat spoonfuls even when she tried to push it away. "You'll need strength," he said firmly. "A body don't mend on will alone." Her lips twitched, almost like the beginning of a smile. "You sound like my father used to." Her voice broke on the last word, and she quickly turned her face toward the fire so he wouldn't see the tears that welled up. Luke let her have the silence. He had learned long ago that silence carried more kindness than most words. But outside, silence didn't last. The horse snorted low and restless, and Luke's head turned toward the door. He set the spoon down, every sense sharpening. "You stay quiet," he said softly, rising from the stool. He took his rifle from where it leaned against the wall, checked the chamber, and moved to the door. The woman clutched the blanket tighter, her wide eyes following his every step. Luke eased the door open. The forest lay still, the snow silver in moonlight, but he saw what the horse had smelled, shadows moving between the pines. 2 men, maybe 3, one of them carried a lantern. its faint glow bobbing with each step. They weren't trying hard to hide. Luke's jaw tightened. He shut the door quietly and turned back toward her. Her face had gone pale, her hands clutching the blanket until her knuckles whitened. "They found me," she whispered. Luke crouched beside her. His voice stayed calm, though his blood had turned cold. "Listen to me. You're safe here. Do you understand? Safe." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but she nodded. He stood again, shoulders broad against the firelight, and set his rifle across his arms. "Then let's see if these gentlemen are fool enough to knock on my door." The crackle of the fire filled the silence that followed. Outside, the lantern glow drew nearer, step by step. Luke Harwood narrowed his eyes. Trub. Lee had come calling sooner than he'd hoped. Snow crunched outside the cabin, deliberate steps pressing into the frozen crust. Luke stood by the fire, rifle balanced in his hands, and listened. He counted 2 voices, maybe 3, carried low through the night air. They were close now, too close to be passing through by chance. The woman drew in a sharp breath, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. "Don't let them take me," she whispered. Luke didn't turn. His eyes stayed on the door. "No one's taking you," he said, steady as oak. A heavy knock rattled the planks, the sound sharp in the hush of the woods. "Evening in there," came a voice, slow and mocking. "We're looking for something that belongs to us. Best hand it over." Luke's grip tightened on the rifle. He stepped forward, the fire throwing his shadow tall across the wall. "Ain't nothing in here that belongs to the likes of you." Silence answered him at first. Then another knock, harder, angrier. "You got her. We saw the tracks. Don't play dumb, old man." Luke glanced at the woman, her face pale, her lips trembling. He gave her a look that said, "Trust me." The latch lifted from outside, but the door held fast against the bar. Luke had slid into place. The men cursed and shoved, their shoulders thudding against the wood. Luke spoke through the door, voice low and dangerous. "This cabin's mine. Step back now, and I'll let you walk away with your bones still inside your skin." For a heartbeat, the night went still again. Then laughter, cruel, sharp, broke the silence. "You don't scare us, mountain man," one of them jeered. "Ain't no law up here but what we make." Luke's eyes narrowed. He set his rifle against the table long enough to pull on his coat and hat. Then he picked the weapon back up, checked the chamber, and drew a long breath. He turned to her one last time. "Stay low. Keep quiet. If they come, through that door." His words trailed off, but she nodded, already crouching near the hearth, her body trembling but her eyes locked on him with something close to faith. The men outside gave. Another shove, this time with more force. The hinges groaned. Snow spilled from the roof as the cabin shook under the blow. Luke Harwood shifted his stance, planting his boots firm against the floorboards. He wasn't just guarding a stranger anymore. He was standing against every wicked hand that had ever tried to snatch away what little good the world had left. The bar creaked. The door buckled. And the mountain man's voice cut through the night like steel. "Come on, then." The door split on its hinges with a crack like gunfire. Cold air and snow burst inside as 3 figures shouldered through, lantern light glinting off iron and steel. Luke was already moving. The rifle lifted to his shoulder, and before the first man cleared the threshold, thunder rolled inside the cabin. The shot slammed him back into the drift, his cry cut off as snow swallowed him whole. The second rushed in, swinging a club. Luke sidestepped, grabbed the man's coat, and drove the stock of his rifle into his jaw. Bone cracked. The man dropped like a sack of grain. The third lingered outside the doorway, half hidden by the storm, pistol raised. The woman gasped, her voice sharp. "Luke!" He dove aside just as the shot rang, the bullet splintering the table behind him. In the same breath, Luke rolled, came up on one knee, and fired. The muzzle flash lit the snow-bright night, and the gunman staggered back, clutching his shoulder, before vanishing into the dark. Silence fell again, broken only by the hiss of the fire and the woman's ragged breathing. Luke rose, chest heaving, rifle steady in his hands, listening for more. Nothing but the wail of the wind. The woman was still crouched near the hearth, her hands pressed to her mouth. When Luke turned to her, she whispered, "You saved me. They would have—" He cut her off with a shake of his head. "Ain't over yet. That one's still out there. Luba." Kay stepped outside into the storm, boots sinking deep into snow, rifle barrels smoking in the night. The drifting snow swallowed tracks quick, but not quick enough. He followed them, slow and silent, until he reached the edge of the pines. Somewhere out there, wounded and furious, the last man waited. Luke tightened his grip on the rifle. He wasn't hunting deer tonight. He was hunting a wolf. Snow whispered through the pines, each flake falling with a soundless weight that only deepened the stillness. Luke pressed his back against a trunk, breath low, rifle ready. Somewhere close, he knew, the last man was circling. A branch cracked. Luke swung the rifle toward the sound, eyes straining against the dark. The trees loomed like silent giants, their shadows twisting with the storm. For a moment, there was nothing, only wind. Then a voice drifted through the night. "You can't keep her, Cowboy." Luke froze. The voice was raw, heavy with pain, but mocking still. The outlaw was bleeding, but not broken. "You think you saved her? All you did was put a mark on your own back." The words slid through the snow like poison. Luke's jaw clenched. He knew talk like that wasn't meant for him. It was meant for the woman shivering in the cabin, meant to twist her fear tighter. Luke didn't answer. The snow shifted ahead, a darker shadow against the white. The outlaw lunged, pistol up, teeth bared. Luke fired. The crack split the trees, echo rolling through the canyon. The man staggered, dropped to his knees and crumpled face first into the snow. For a long time, Luke stood over him, listening to the storm swallow the last ragged breath. No words, no prayers, just the snow covering him over, fast as a grave-digger. When he returned to the cabin, the woman was still by the fire, knees pulled to her chest. She looked up at him, eyes wide, searching his face. "It's done," Luke said, simply setting the rifle aside. He knelt by the fire, the heat flushing the cold from his skin. Her hands trembled and she whispered, I thought they'd never stop." Luke stared into the flames, voice low. They stopped tonight. The storm beat against the cabin walls, but inside the fire burned steady. And for the first time in days, she allowed herself to believe she might see morning. The storm broke by morning. What had been a white roar in the night softened into a hush of drifting flakes. The world outside the cabin muted and still, as though the violence of the days before had never been. Luke opened the door just wide enough to look out. The bodies were gone beneath the drifts, the canyon floor smoothed over like a blank page. The pines sagged with fresh weight, branches bowed low, and the creek below sang faintly under its frozen skin. It was a new silence, but one earned by blood. Behind him, the woman stirred. She had slept for the first time without jerking awake at every sound. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed, but the wild edge of fear had dulled. When she saw him framed in the doorway, she whispered, "It's over, isn't it?" Luke turned, meeting her gaze. He wanted to promise her that it was, that the men who had chained her, who had hunted her, would never rise again. But he'd lived long enough to know the truth. The world always carried more cruelty just around the bend. Still, he crossed the room, crouched by her side, and laid his coat across her shoulders. "It's over for now," he said. His voice was steady, anchored like the fire that burned low in the hearth. She touched the coat lightly, fingers brushing the rough wool. "Why would you do this for me? You don't even know my name." Luke studied her for a long moment, the lines in his weathered face catching the light. Then he said simply, "A person doesn't need a name to deserve saving." Her throat tightened, and she looked away, blinking fast. The fire popped softly, filling the silence between them. After a while, Luke rose, poured water into a tin cup and held it out to her. "Drink. You'll need your strength if we're to make it out of these hills." She took the cup in both hands, warmth seeping into her chilled skin. The first sip burned her throat, but it was a good kind of pain, the kind that meant life was still inside her. Luke stepped back, his gaze drifting toward the shuttered window. Beyond the cabin, the world was still dangerous, but inside, the storm had broken, and with it, something inside her had shifted too. For the first time since her world had been torn apart, she let herself believe in something she thought she'd lost. Tomorrow,